Today my group will be presenting Symphony No. 3, Movement 1 by Peter Tchaikovsky. My name is Addison C, and I will be presenting melody and pitch/key. Bianca will be discussing dynamics and texture, and Isabella will be discussing forms and timbre. For this piece, the sonata allegro form is used in the first movement, meaning that there is an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation, which means that the melody is going to change throughout this movement. So, for example, at the beginning of the piece at 1:13 as a timestamp, everything starts off with a double bass plucking on the string, which I will show you very soon. And the tone quality of the overall orchestra that comes in 2 seconds afterwards is very rich and light, but the key is minor, making the piece overall very suspenseful. And when the violins come in, they take on a melody, while the cellos and double basses continue to pluck on the string, which again will be evident when I play the recording. And the violas harmonize with the violin, creating a homophonic texture. And at 1:45, the brass enters the orchestra that was consisting of strings for the very beginning, and they take on the melody. Go on with that melody, it creates this whimsy tune. So the overall melody takes place with the violins. As they all create that piece, they're all taking a part of the melody and introducing new themes because it's in the exposition. Okay, so here is the timestamp where the brass enters. As you can see, the woodwinds entered through here as well, but the brass carried on the heavier melody, and the violins and the brass together were kind of compromising in a way. They all carried the same melody, the rhythm was the same, and it was introducing a new theme into the piece, which created that texture that we heard right about here. As you can see, it sounds very suspenseful, very dramatic, and the brass and the violins are taking on the melody together. For the development section, which we'll be calling Melody 2 for the presentation, the melody now is developing and it's alternating from the original melody, creating a new melody, but it's really just an alteration. So here it sounds a bit lighter and brighter and more bold in a way, but it's still the same melody, it's just increasing tempo or adding on with new instruments, and the timbre can make the melody sound a bit different. For example, in 803 in the video, the accent of the piccolo playing alongside with the violin as the melody makes it sound a bit different. But it's still the same, it's just alternating with the timbre of the instrument. The key has changed to a major key, which creates the biggest difference. And by 9:19, the melody has developed, the violins are taking on the melody, but at a faster tempo. The double basses and the cellos are plucking on their strings once again. That was the beginning melody from exposition. So it's just the tempo is increasing, there's more instruments. The mood is a little more tense and enchanting, so when it increases, it makes an intensity in the sound, making the melody sound a bit different. But that's just the alteration in the sonata allegro form. This is 9:19. This is 9:19. As we heard just now, very recently, there's an intensity that's building up and the violins are playing at a faster tempo. But originally beforehand, where the piece started, at this timestamp, the melody was similar to the exposition, except it was altered, which is a prime example of development here in this section, and this is a prime example of melody too. The pitch and key of this movement changes overall during the sonata allegro format. During the exposition, the minor key was prominent and the tones were deeper and less bright compared to the development, making the key minor, and the pitch was lower because there was a lot of double bass and cello movement, and the violins did carry on a brighter melody than them, but it was still suspenseful and tense for a majority of the exposition. Unlike the development, the pitch changes a lot more often. The best example that I have for you is at 8:33. The tone deepened a bit across the full orchestra and made the piece feel suspenseful. The key was leaning towards minor due to the suspense, but it was still major because the pitch was high and creating a bit of a joyful melody. The suspense can make it a bit tricky on debating whether it is minor or major, but it is still major because of the pitch. At 9:56, the suspenseful tone is dragged into the increased pitch with crescendo and vanishes into a polyphonic texture where the violins and the piccolo, the trombone, and etc. instruments are playing the same melody. The key here was major, as I said before. The tone was brighter and lighter than previously, which was beforehand of 9:56. This link is taken to 8:33. So in the clip that I just showed you, you can tell that at the very beginning of it, it seemed a bit bright, and all of a sudden the suspense came. This snippet is a very good example of the importance of pitch. The pitch created a bit of a suspenseful tone, and it made the key sound a bit leaning towards minor, as I mentioned on the slideshow. However, the key is still major, because as you can see, there's a lot of vibrance in the piece and how they played it and performed it with the instruments and the articulation and the rhythm. It's developing as it goes into that crescendo, and it got a little more delicate from where I paused it, and it sounded very light, a little brighter than the exposition. In general, in this movement, including the recapitulation, it has an alternating key, but a majority of it is major. And there's a continuation from the melodies, as I mentioned before, it alternates, and a bit of a pattern. It takes on the melody from the exposition and the recapitulation and the developments here, and it creates the first movement.
My name is Bianca. The elements that I'm doing is dynamics and texture. I would like to start off with the definition of dynamics. It's usually how loud or how quiet the piece is, which you could get it confused with texture, which is how high or how low the pitch is, but dynamics is the overall volume of the piece, of how loud or how quiet it is. So over here we have all types of different dynamics, which is pianissimo, which is the quietest, which is very soft, piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo, which is the loudest. So going from quiet to loud, which is a crescendo, and going from from loud to quiet is a decrescendo. It happens a lot during the piece, and I chose the part 420 to 444 as an example, as a crescendo going from mezzo forte to fortissimo, and I could just play for you right here.
From idea to submission.
So that would be your crescendo going from quiet to loud. And I would show you the decrescendo example, but I can't because there will not be enough time. The next element that we will be discussing is texture. So there's two textures in this piece, which is homophonic and polyphonic. The primary texture of the piece is homophonic, and homophonic is the melody with a simple accompaniment. And an example that I chose is at 119 to 217. It has a homophonic texture, but that's just one part. For polyphonic, which means multiple melodic lines happening at the same time, 2 or more. Yeah, that's what it means. And I chose the 420 to 434 as an example, which I cannot play because it would be too long. But yeah.
Hi, my name is Isabella, and today I'm going to be introducing the timbre and form of Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 3, first movement. For timbre, I organized it into 2 different sections. We have the moderato section, which is the introduction, and then the allegro brillante section, which is basically where the exposition starts. To begin with the moderato section, I organized the chart into the 4 different musical families. I have the strings, the woodwinds, the percussion, well, the timpani, and the brass. So the strings, consisting of the violins, violas, cellos, basses, they sounded very warm and rich and velvety because they introduced like the mood of the piece for these first couple of seconds. The woodwinds, which are very like subtle, their melody isn't so harsh, and it's rather like adding to the theme they've got going on of like very heavy but slowly picking up the pace in order to get to the brillante section. The timpani, I thought it was very cool, but I felt that it was like a little bit held back and soft rather than like the loud timpani. The brass, they were pretty mellow and weighted down, as I felt that was the mood that the piece was going for. I'm going to show a little clip of the beginning couple of seconds. Now that we've made it to the brillante section, I'm going to talk about the shift in mood. So the strings now have a very crisp and energetic and sharp movements of their quarter notes and their eighth notes and their rhythms. They are all very crisp and sparkly and energetic. And the woodwinds are very expressive and playful and lively and humorous, and it really like adds to the touch of like the brillante, which is basically saying like it's very brilliant and it's expressive. The percussion, the timpani, is a lot more active and defined, and the brass are very bold and heroic and rounded and sharp. And I'm going to show you another clip of once we begin the brillante section. Now that you have listened to the build-up and introduction of the brillante section, I'm going to talk about the form of the first movement altogether. So as we studied in the classical era, we learned about sonata allegro form and its 3 sections: the exposition, development, and recapitulation. So these 3 also appear in the Romantic era, and we also have an introduction section before we get into the exposition, which is the moderato. The exposition doesn't start until the allegro brillante, between timestamps of 3:30 to 7:34, and there the 2 contrasting themes are seen and heard, and the first one is very bold and energetic, while the second one is very lyrical and graceful, as a lot more legato notes are getting passed. And then once we make it into the development section, the lower strings and brass really take over and shoot over the top and the rhythms change slightly, and there's a lot of dynamic contrast. Because as we've seen, there is a lot of crescendos and build-ups, and it's a whole bunch of like phrasing that the orchestra really gets into, which changes up the mood from the exposition. And then lastly, we have the recapitulation, which brings back the original themes. The mood is now very much solidified, a lot more cleaned up, and it's just very prominent that that is the theme. That goes from basically 10:45 to the coda, which closes off the piece. So now I will show you the little timestamps that I have set up for each of the sections. And to close off this presentation, we have our little facts about Tchaikovsky. He was born on May 7th, 1840, and then he passed away November 6th, 1893. He was a Russian composer during the Romantic era, which we just finished studying. And then we have that he composed many symphonies, just like this one, Symphony Number 3. He composed a bunch of concertos and ballets, such as the Nutcracker, and a bunch of chamber music. And he's also composed some pretty famous things like Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty. That is our presentation. Thank you.